It was already dark when the private car turned into the long driveway that led to the mansion at the edge of the city. The headlights brushed over the tall iron gates, the trimmed hedges, and the quiet fountain that glimmered faintly under the soft glow of the garden lights. The man sitting in the back seat looked out of the window with a small smile. He was tired from the long flight, but a strange excitement ran through him. For weeks he had been away. Meetings, hotels, endless dinners, signing deals that would add more zeros to his bank account. But tonight he was not thinking about money or work. He was thinking about home. He had told no one that he was coming back early. His wife thought he would be gone for another week, and even his driver had been surprised to receive the call that morning. He wanted to see what life at home looked like when he wasn't around. Not because he suspected anything bad, he simply missed the quiet comfort of normal life. The laughter in the kitchen, the smell of morning coffee, the sound of footsteps echoing in the hall. He wanted to feel that again. As the car stopped in front of the main door, he told the driver to leave the luggage in the trunk. He would handle it himself. He stepped out into the cool night air, straightened his coat, and looked up at the house. The mansion was large but not loud. It had been built with love years ago, back when he was still learning what success meant. Every brick reminded him of his journey, from the small apartment where he had started to this grand place that people often called a dream home. He reached for his keys and quietly unlocked the door. The familiar click echoed through the hallway. Inside, everything looked just the same. Clean floors, polished furniture, the faint scent of lavender from the air freshener. But there was something different, too. It was too quiet. Usually the television would be humming in the living room, or the housekeeper would be humming an old song while she worked. Tonight there was only silence. He placed his bag down and slowly walked inside. The living room light was dim, casting soft golden shadows over the walls. The curtains were half drawn, letting a bit of moonlight fall across the marble floor. He could hear faint sounds coming from the kitchen, a soft clatter of dishes, the shuffle of feet, and then a low tune being hummed. He smiled to himself. She's still here, he thought. The maid who had been with his family for years was known for her dedication. She rarely took days off, and she treated the house as if it were her own. He had always appreciated her, though he had never really taken the time to talk to her beyond polite greetings. Work always came first. Curious, he moved quietly toward the sound. The closer he got, the clearer it became. She was humming an old melody, something cheerful yet slightly sad. When he peeked around the corner, he froze. The maid was standing by the counter wearing her simple uniform, her hair tied neatly back. But she wasn't just cleaning or preparing tea. She was setting the dining table, slowly, carefully, with a kind of grace that didn't fit the hour. The tablecloth was white and perfectly straight. Candles stood in the center, unlit but ready. Plates, glasses, and silverware were placed one by one, each movement done with quiet attention. He frowned slightly, confused. Why was she setting the table at this hour? His wife and children were away visiting relatives. There was no one else in the house. He took a step closer, careful not to make a sound. On the table were small boxes wrapped in paper and tied with ribbons. He squinted, trying to read the tags. Each box had a name on it, his wife's, and his 2 children's. He stood there in silence, not knowing what to think. Was it some kind of celebration? A special day he had forgotten? He searched his memory. No birthdays, no anniversaries, nothing important he could recall. The maid continued working. She arranged the plates, then lit the candles. The soft light flickered across her face. There was a peaceful look in her eyes, the kind that comes from doing something with purpose. She sighed, almost whispering to herself, "I hope they all like it." He stayed hidden by the doorway, his heart strangely tight. He had always thought of his house as a place of order and beauty, but right now it felt alive in a different way, warmer, softer. There was something deeply human about watching someone care for a home when no one was watching. For a few minutes, he simply observed her. She moved from one corner to another, adjusting a flower vase, checking the oven, folding napkins with delicate care. Then she walked to a small shelf by the wall and picked up a framed photo, the family photo taken years ago at the beach. She wiped the dust from the frame with a cloth and smiled at it. Her voice was low but clear when she spoke again, this time almost like a prayer. "You all gave me a life when I had none. I don't forget that." The man felt a lump in his throat. He leaned against the wall, remembering the day he had hired her. It had been raining heavily that morning. She had come to the gate soaked, holding a letter of reference from an old neighbor. She had no experience, only honesty in her eyes. His wife had insisted on giving her a chance. That was years ago. Since then, she had become a quiet presence in their lives, never asking for more than she needed, never complaining. He watched as she walked around lighting the last candle. The soft glow filled the room, and for a moment it looked magical. The flickering light touched every corner, reflecting on the silverware, dancing on the glass. She stood still, looking at the table with a small, proud smile. The man took a deep breath. He wanted to step forward and ask her what this was all about, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the peacefulness of the moment, or maybe it was the feeling that he was intruding on something deeply personal. He quietly stepped back into the hallway, thinking he would go upstairs and rest. But before he could move away, he heard her whisper again. "Thank you for giving me a home," she said softly, her eyes still fixed on the photo frame. "Even if no one remembers me one day, I will always remember this kindness." He felt his chest tighten again. In all his years of running companies and managing people, he had rarely seen such pure gratitude. He thought of how often he had walked past her without noticing the small things she did. The fresh flowers in the hallway, the folded blankets by the couch, the way she always made sure his study smelled of lemon polish and not dust. He realized he had taken it all for granted. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft crackle of candle flames filled the room. She finally sat down at the table, placed her hands together, and closed her eyes. Maybe she was praying, maybe just remembering. Either way, he didn't want to interrupt. He stepped back even more quietly this time, went upstairs and stood by the railing that overlooked the living room. From above, he could see the entire scene, the table, the candles, the maid sitting alone in the warm light. He thought about the irony of it all. He had returned home early, hoping to catch a glimpse of what people did when he wasn't around. He had expected to find maybe a little disorder, maybe carelessness. Instead, he found something completely different: devotion. Minutes passed before he finally went into his bedroom. The sheets were clean, the pillows fluffed, his favorite book placed neatly on the nightstand. Everything spoke of care. He sat on the edge of the bed, feeling both humbled and restless. For years he had believed success meant comfort and recognition. But tonight, standing quietly in his own home, he realized there were people around him whose silent work gave that success meaning. He got up again and looked out of the window. Down below, through the glass, he could still see the faint light from the candles. The maid had finished her quiet ritual and was now blowing them out one by one. The last flame flickered, then disappeared, leaving the room in darkness. He lay down at last, staring at the ceiling. The house was peaceful again, but he couldn't sleep. His mind was full of questions. Why did she do it? Why prepare gifts for everyone when no one was home? He wanted to ask, but he also wanted to see what she would do next. By the time the clock struck midnight, he had made up his mind. He would wait until morning before revealing that he was home. He wanted to understand the meaning behind her quiet gesture. Maybe there was a story he had never heard, a piece of life he had missed while chasing his dreams. He turned off the bedside lamp and closed his eyes, the image of the glowing candles still fresh in his mind. Somewhere downstairs, the maid moved softly, finishing her chores before bed. And in that stillness, the millionaire realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes the greatest surprises don't come from wealth or success. They come from kindness that happens when no one is looking. He drifted off to sleep, unaware that the morning would bring answers he never expected. The sun rose slowly behind the hills, spilling soft gold across the sky. The large windows of the mansion caught the light, filling the quiet rooms with warmth. Birds chirped in the garden, and the fountain outside murmured gently. The man woke up to the sound of morning peace, his mind still heavy with the thoughts from last night. He sat up in bed and looked around the room. Everything was neat and shining, just as he had left it years ago when his business started taking him away more often. The sheets smelled of fresh linen, and the air carried a faint hint of coffee from the kitchen downstairs. For a moment he wondered if the maid already knew he was home. He got up quietly, changed into a simple shirt, and walked out into the hallway. The morning light flooded through the tall windows, painting soft patterns on the floor. As he walked down the stairs, he could hear the same soft humming he had heard the night before. It was coming from the kitchen again. He stopped halfway down and smiled slightly. She was humming the same tune, only this time the sound was lighter, happier. He moved closer and peeked around the corner again. The maid was already busy, cleaning the dishes, preparing breakfast, and moving with the same quiet energy she always carried. The table from last night was cleared, but he noticed that the small boxes were still there on the sideboard. The candles had been put away neatly. She was packing something into a lunch container, probably her own meal for later. He wanted to say good morning, but something inside him held back. Maybe he was still curious to see how she behaved when no one knew he was home. So, he stepped back quietly again, hiding behind the wall. As he listened, he heard her talking to herself in a low voice, not complaining, just thinking out loud the way people do when they spend most of their days alone. She said softly, "One day I'll tell them thank you properly. They gave me more than just work. They gave me a reason to live again." The man's heart tightened. He leaned against the wall, remembering the first time she had entered their lives. She had been shy, almost afraid to speak, but she had always worked hard. Over the years, she had become part of the home without anyone really noticing how important she was to it. He quietly stepped back into the living room, sat down on the couch, and waited. He wanted to surprise her gently. When he finally spoke, his voice came out calm and soft. "Good morning." The sound startled her. She turned around, her eyes wide, hands frozen midair. For a second, she didn't move. Then she placed the plate she was holding onto the counter and stared in disbelief. "Sir? You're home?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He smiled kindly. "Yes, I came back a little earlier than planned." She looked completely lost for words. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I would have prepared breakfast properly and—" He interrupted her gently. "It's all right. You've already done more than enough." She hesitated, unsure what to do. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked finally, her voice still nervous. "Yes, please," he said, and took a seat at the kitchen table. She poured the coffee, still looking embarrassed as if she had been caught doing something wrong. But he didn't want her to feel that way. He wanted her to relax, so he said softly, "You know, I saw what you did last night." Her hands froze again. The cup almost slipped from her grip. "You saw that?" "Yes," he replied, his tone gentle. "I came home late and saw you setting the table with candles and gifts. I didn't want to disturb you. I just watched." She placed the cup in front of him and sat down slowly, her face turning a little pale. "I didn't mean anything strange, sir. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Every month on the day you hired me, I make a small dinner like that. I don't expect anyone to see it. It's just something that keeps me grateful." He didn't say anything right away. He took a slow sip of coffee, giving her time to continue. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers nervously. "When you gave me this job, I had nothing. My husband had passed away, my children were small, and I didn't know how I'd feed them. I came here with a letter from your neighbor, praying someone would give me a chance. You didn't ask many questions, you just said you'd start tomorrow. That day changed my life." Her voice broke slightly at the last words. She took a deep breath before going on. "I didn't know how to thank you, so every month I cook a small meal and say a prayer for your family. It's my way of remembering that day. I know it's silly, but it helps me stay thankful." The man sat there quietly, staring at her. His eyes softened. He hadn't expected this. He had assumed she might have some personal reason for the setup. Maybe she was waiting for someone, maybe she was celebrating something else. But gratitude? That was the last thing he had imagined. He finally said, "It's not silly, it's beautiful." She looked up at him, surprised. "I've spent so many years running after business and money," he continued. "Sometimes I forget the people who make my life peaceful. You've been here through everything, keeping this home alive while I was away. I never realized how much that meant until last night." Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away with the edge of her apron. "You don't have to say that, sir. I just do my work." "No," he said firmly. "You do much more than that." For a moment, there was silence between them. Comfortable silence. The kind that happens when two people suddenly understand each other, in a way they never did before. The maid got up and brought him a plate of toast and eggs, the same breakfast she always made for the family. She placed it in front of him quietly. "Eat something," she said softly. He smiled and nodded. "You know," he said after a moment, "I think this might be the best meal I've had in a long time." She laughed nervously. "You've eaten in fancy hotels." This is just simple food. Sometimes simple is exactly what a person needs, he said. He ate slowly, thinking deeply. For years his life had been filled with luxury, meetings, travel, expensive dinners, and endless phone calls. Yet in all that time he couldn't remember feeling the calmness he felt right now. The smell of fresh bread, the sound of birds outside, the quiet kindness in someone's eyes. It was a reminder of something he had lost without noticing. After breakfast, he followed her into the living room. The sunlight was spilling across the floor and the air felt light and clean. He noticed the boxes again and asked, "What's inside those?" "Oh," she said, blushing a little. "They're small gifts. Nothing expensive. Just little things I buy for the family. Handmade candles, bookmarks, sweets. I keep them there for the day everyone returns home. I like to make the place feel warm." He walked closer and picked up the box with his name on it. It was wrapped neatly in brown paper, tied with a simple red ribbon. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The gesture itself said more than any gift inside could. He looked at her again and said quietly, "You have a kind heart." She smiled shyly, lowering her eyes. "I just try to make this house feel like a home." He nodded, feeling a strange ache in his chest. For so long he had thought of this house as a symbol of success, a reward for years of hard work. But now, looking around, he realized something he had never truly seen before. The home didn't feel alive because of its size or beauty. It felt alive because of the small acts of care that people like her put into it. As the morning went on, they talked a little more about her children, about how she manages her day, about the small things that made her happy. She didn't complain about her struggles, though he could tell life hadn't been easy for her. Instead, she spoke with quiet pride about her family and her faith. At one point, she looked at him and said, "You know, sir, sometimes people think being rich means you don't need kindness. But I think everyone does, even those who seem to have everything." Her words struck him deeply. He looked out the window for a moment before saying, "You're right. Maybe that's something I needed to be reminded of." The rest of the day passed calmly. He went to his study to check some documents, but his mind kept returning to what she had said. Every sound in the house, the broom sweeping, the dishes clinking, felt different now. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It was the sound of someone's heart quietly doing its work. When the evening came, he stepped out into the garden. The air smelled of flowers and the lights from the windows glowed softly. The maid was locking the back door, ready to go home for the day. He called out to her and she turned, a little surprised. "Thank you," he said simply. She smiled, nodded, and walked away down the path. He stood there for a long time, watching her go, thinking about how easily people overlook quiet goodness. That night he made himself a promise he would never again take kindness for granted. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of how much his life and hers was about to change. The morning after his quiet talk with the maid, the millionaire woke up feeling lighter than usual. The house felt peaceful in a new way. He could hear the faint sound of the vacuum in the hallway, and the gentle rustle of curtains being drawn open. The smell of breakfast drifted from the kitchen, freshly baked bread, tea, and a hint of butter. It was an ordinary morning, yet somehow it felt extraordinary to him now. He walked downstairs slowly, taking in everything. The framed photos on the wall, the polished floor, the sunlight touching the furniture. For years he had rushed past these same sights, too busy thinking about meetings and deadlines. But today he noticed the little things. The home had warmth, and that warmth had come from care, the kind of care that couldn't be bought. When he entered the kitchen, the maid was already at work. She turned as soon as she saw him and greeted him with a smile. Her nervousness from yesterday seemed to have faded. Maybe she felt more comfortable now that the secret of her quiet dinners was out. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. "Good morning," he replied. "You start your day early as always." She smiled again and nodded. "It helps me finish everything before the family comes back." He sat at the table watching as she moved around. She didn't rush, yet everything she did seemed purposeful. The way she arranged the plates, wiped the counter, and folded the towels, it was all done with gentle precision. "Do you ever rest?" he asked suddenly. She paused, thinking for a moment. "Sometimes," she said, "but I like keeping busy. It keeps my mind peaceful." He nodded. He understood what she meant. He too had once found peace in work, before money and success turned it into pressure. As she poured him a cup of tea, he noticed a small bruise on her wrist. Did you hurt yourself? He asked. Oh, that, she said quickly, hiding it behind her apron. It's nothing. I just bumped into the cabinet yesterday while cleaning. I'm fine. Her tone was calm, but it made him realize how easily people like her ignored their own pain. He wanted to say something kind, but didn't know how without making her uncomfortable. So he simply said, Please be careful next time. This house needs you healthy. Her eyes softened. Thank you, sir. After breakfast, he went out to the garden. The grass was freshly trimmed and the morning air was cool. He sat on a wooden bench and thought about how strange life was. You could have everything, cars, money, a big house, and still feel something missing. Yesterday, a simple act of gratitude from someone who had so little reminded him what truly mattered. As he sat there, lost in thought, he noticed movement by the fence. The maid was hanging laundry on the line, humming softly to herself. She looked peaceful, her hands working gently as the sheets fluttered in the breeze. Something about the scene filled him with quiet respect. He walked closer and she quickly turned, surprised again. Oh, I didn't see you there, she said with a shy laugh. I didn't mean to startle you, he said. You seem to love music. You're always humming something. It helps me think, she said, smiling. Some songs remind me of home, he nodded. Do you ever miss it? Your home? She hesitated for a moment. Sometimes, she admitted. But I visit my children often. They're grown now, both studying in the city. I stay here during the week so I can send them money for their books. He listened quietly. There was pride in her voice when she mentioned her children. You must be proud of them, he said. I am, she replied with a gentle smile. They've worked hard. I just want them to have a better life than I did. He thought about that for a moment. And they will, he said softly. Because of you. Her eyes shimmered a little, but she quickly turned back to the laundry. Thank you, sir, she said. The day went by slowly. He spent time going through paperwork in his study, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her story. He couldn't stop thinking about how much she had endured silently. He realized how many times he'd passed her in the hallway without truly seeing her, not as an employee, but as a human being with dreams, worries, and a heart full of gratitude. In the evening, when the house grew quiet again, he went downstairs. The smell of dinner filled the air. She was in the kitchen, stirring soup on the stove. The golden light from the lamps made the place look warm and homely. Smells good, he said, walking in. She smiled. It's just vegetable soup, sir. Simple but healthy. He laughed lightly. You always say that, simple but healthy. She grinned. That's the secret to everything, I think. He watched her for a moment. Then he asked, Tell me something. When you set the table last night, you put gift boxes for each of us. Why include my name too? She looked surprised by the question. Because you're part of the family, she said. You gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. I never forgot that. Her answer hit him deeply. He hadn't expected such simple honesty. Most people would have forgotten. Something like that after so many years. He said, quietly, I don't forget. Kindness, she said simply. The way she said it made him think about all the times he had rushed through life, forgetting to appreciate people. He remembered his assistants, his staff, even his driver, people who made his life easier but rarely received a real thank you. They sat at the table and shared dinner together. It was a simple meal, bread, soup, and some rice, but it felt warm. She told him small stories from her past, funny moments from when his children were younger, and memories of when the house was being built. Her laughter was light and real. At one point, she said something that made him pause. Do you know, sir, sometimes I talk to this house like it's a person. It listens better than most people. He chuckled. What do you say to it? Oh, little things, she said, smiling shyly. I thank it for keeping me safe. I tell it that one day your family will fill it with noise again. And sometimes I ask it to stay strong because it's full of good memories. He looked around the room. The walls seemed to glow faintly under the warm lights, as if they were indeed holding on to the laughter, the footsteps, the years of life that had passed through them. For the first time in a long while, he truly felt at home, not because of what he owned, but because of the spirit that filled it. After dinner, she began to clean up, and he offered to help. She immediately refused, almost embarrassed. No, sir. You'll make me nervous if you start doing dishes. He laughed again. Then maybe I'll just keep you company. So he stayed, leaning against the counter, talking to her as she worked. The conversation was light, about recipes, about how quickly time passes, about small things that usually go unnoticed. But every word carried warmth. When everything was done, she wiped her hands on a towel and turned to him. "I hope it wasn't strange that you saw me last night. I didn't mean to make it seem like I was celebrating alone." He shook his head. "It wasn't strange at all. It was one of the most honest things I've ever seen." Her eyes softened. "Honest things are rare these days," she said quietly. He nodded slowly. "That's true." There was a brief silence, and then he asked, "When was the last time someone thanked you properly?" She laughed lightly. "You just did." He smiled, but her answer stayed in his mind long after she went to her room for the night. Later, as he sat alone in the living room, the faint sound of the wind outside made the candles flicker slightly. He thought about everything he had learned in the past 2 days. He had always believed success was built with ambition, but now he was beginning to understand that it was also built with people, kind, loyal, invisible people whose quiet work made the world move. He looked again at the small gift box with his name on it. This time he carefully opened it. Inside was a simple folded note tied with string. The handwriting was neat and careful. It read, "Thank you for giving me dignity when I had lost everything. You may never know how much that meant, but I will never forget it." He sat there for a long time, staring at the note, feeling something stir inside him. It wasn't pride. It wasn't guilt. It was something deeper, a mix of gratitude and humility. He folded the note gently and placed it back in the box. Then he looked around the quiet room, feeling a strange warmth rise in his chest. For the first time in many years, he realized he wasn't just living in a house. He was living in a home, one built not by money but by care. And as the night deepened, he made himself another silent promise. He would do something meaningful for the person who had reminded him what humanity looked like. He didn't yet know how, but he knew he would find a way. The candles burned softly, the clock ticked steadily, and somewhere down the hall, the maid's gentle humming faded into the stillness of the night. The next morning was bright and calm. Sunlight poured through the windows, touching the clean floors and glowing curtains. The house looked peaceful, almost alive in a way he hadn't seen in years. The man woke up feeling more rested than usual, though his mind was still filled with thoughts from the night before. The note he had found inside the small gift box rested on his bedside table. He had read it several times, and every time he did, it made him think deeply about how much a single act of kindness could change someone's entire world. He got out of bed and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the maid sweeping the front porch. She was humming again, softly, the same tune that had become so familiar now. It drifted up through the open window and filled the room with warmth. He stood there for a while, just watching her. She moved with calm rhythm, her hands steady, her expression peaceful. After a few minutes, he went downstairs. She looked up as soon as she saw him and greeted him with a smile. "Good morning, sir," she said cheerfully. "Good morning," he replied. "You're up early again," she laughed quietly. "It's a habit I can't change. The mornings feel empty if I'm not doing something." He nodded, smiling slightly. "You make this house come alive." "I don't think I ever noticed that before." Her eyes softened. "That's very kind of you to say." He walked to the kitchen table where breakfast was already waiting, fresh bread, tea, and fruit. He sat down, watching her work. She never stopped moving. Even while talking, her hands were busy, wiping, arranging, preparing. He thought about how rare it was to see someone so committed to their work without expecting anything in return. As he ate, he decided it was time to learn more about her. He wanted to understand the person who had quietly become the heart of his home. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said gently. She looked up from the counter, surprised but curious. "Of course, sir. You said yesterday that your children are studying in the city. How are they doing?" Her face brightened instantly. "They're doing well," she said proudly. "My daughter is training to be a nurse, and my son is studying engineering. They both work part-time too. They send me messages every night to tell me about their day." He could see the happiness in her eyes. It wasn't the happiness that came from luxury. It was the quiet pride of a parent who had struggled and still managed to give her children a chance. "That's wonderful," he said sincerely. "You must be very proud." "I am," she said, smiling. Then her tone softened. "I still remember when I couldn't even afford their school uniforms. I used to pray every night for a way out. And then this job came. It changed everything. He listened carefully, saying nothing. She continued, I promised myself that I would never waste the opportunity. Every morning I wake up and remind myself of that. This house, it became my blessing. Her words sank deep into his mind. It amazed him how much gratitude could live in someone's heart, even after years of hard work. After breakfast, he walked out to the garden again. The air was fresh and the roses were blooming. He sat on the bench and thought about his own family. His wife and children were away on vacation, and for the first time in a long time he realized how much he missed simple time with them. Maybe he had been too caught up in business and travel. Maybe he had forgotten how important the small things were. As he sat there, the maid came out with a watering can. She started tending to the flowers, careful not to step on the grass she had just cleaned the day before. You take care of everything so well, he said. She smiled, looking at the plants. These flowers are like people. If you give them a little care every day, they stay alive. Ignore them for too long and they fade. Her words sounded simple, but they carried meaning he couldn't ignore. He looked around the garden at the house behind him and thought about his own life. Maybe he had been ignoring things that truly mattered, the people who cared, the quiet moments of home, the human warmth that no amount of money could replace. Later that day, he decided to do something he hadn't done in years, visit the market himself. He told the maid he wanted to drive into town to get a few things. She immediately offered to go instead, worried he might find the local market too crowded, but he insisted. I'll go, he said. It's been too long since I've seen the town myself. When he reached the market, he walked through the narrow lanes filled with small stalls and voices calling out prices. The smell of spices, bread, and fresh fruit filled the air. It reminded him of his childhood when life was simple and he didn't have the weight of success on his shoulders. He stopped at a small shop that sold handmade things, candles, frames, and little trinkets. As he looked through the items, he found something that caught his attention. A small wooden box carved beautifully with tiny flowers. It looked almost exactly like the one the maid had used for her gifts. He picked it up and turned it in his hands. The shopkeeper smiled. It's made by local workers, the man said. Each one is carved by hand. Takes hours to make. The millionaire thought for a moment, then said, I'll take 10 of them. The shopkeeper looked surprised. 10? Yes, he said with a smile. 10. When he returned home, he went straight to his study. He placed the boxes on his desk and sat there for a while, thinking. Then he began to write small notes, short messages of gratitude for every person who worked quietly in his world. His driver, his gardener, his office janitor, his assistant. For years he had thought paying salaries was enough, but now he wanted to give something personal, something that showed appreciation. Each note was different, but they all carried the same meaning. Thank you for your honesty, your care, and your work. By evening, he finished writing and sealed each note inside a box. He kept one aside, the last one, for the maid. He wanted hers to be special. He took out a small gold bracelet from his drawer, one he had bought years ago but never gifted. It was simple, elegant, and meaningful. He placed it inside her box with a note that said, For all the days you made this house feel like home. He smiled softly as he looked at it. The next morning, when she came in to start her work, he was waiting at the dining table. The boxes were neatly arranged in a row. She looked confused. What is all this, sir? These, he said gently, are small gifts for people who make my life easier. You inspired me to do it. Her eyes widened. I did, he nodded. Last night I thought about what you said, the way you show gratitude every month. It made me realize how much I've been taking for granted. She looked touched. That's very kind of you, sir. You've already done enough for so many people. Maybe, he said, but kindness doesn't lose value when you give it again. He handed her the last box. This one is for you. She took it carefully, unsure what to say. Thank you, she whispered. He smiled. You can open it later, she nodded, holding it close. Her eyes glistened, though she tried to hide it. That evening, after finishing her work, she quietly opened the box. When she saw the bracelet and read the note, tears filled her eyes. It wasn't about the gift, it was about being seen, being appreciated. For years she had worked silently, never expecting thanks. Now she finally felt that her effort had meaning beyond duty. The next morning, when he came down for breakfast, he found her waiting at the table with a warm smile. She looked different, lighter, happier. I wanted to thank you for the gift, she said softly. It means more than you can imagine. He smiled. You've earned it. You've done more for this house than I ever realized. She shook her head humbly. No, sir. I just did my job. He looked at her for a long moment and said, sometimes the people who think they're just doing their job are the ones holding the world together. She didn't answer. She just smiled and went back to her work, humming her favorite tune again. As he watched her, the house seemed brighter than ever. Something had changed, not in the walls, but in the air, in the way kindness had quietly spread from one heart to another. That night, as he walked through the quiet rooms before going to bed, he paused at the table where the candles had once burned weeks ago. He remembered the first night he came home early, the surprise, the confusion, and finally the truth that had opened his eyes. He whispered softly to himself, sometimes we come home early to find what we've been missing all along. He turned off the lights, feeling a calm he hadn't felt in years. The house was silent again, but now even the silence carried warmth. The sun had barely risen when the man walked into his garden. The air felt calm, filled with the faint smell of dew and flowers. The birds were already awake, hopping across the grass. For once, he didn't think about business meetings or phone calls. He simply wanted to sit and breathe. Life felt slower now, and he liked it that way. The maid came out quietly, holding a small tray of tea. She didn't say much, just placed it beside him and smiled. There was something peaceful in that silence between them, the kind that didn't need words. You don't have to serve me tea outside, he said gently. She smiled. I know, sir, but I've seen how calm you look out here. I thought you might like it. He nodded. You're right. I do. For a few moments, they both sat quietly. Then he spoke again. Do your children ever come to visit you? Not often, she said softly. They study in the city. They say they'll come when they graduate so I can see them in their uniforms. I keep their old photos on the wall in my room. When I miss them, I look at those and pray they're doing well. He could tell how much she missed them. Every word carried that mother's longing, a quiet strength mixed with gentle sorrow. They must be proud of you, he said. I hope so, she replied, smiling faintly. They always tell me not to work too hard. But when I see this house shining, I feel proud too. It reminds me that my hands built something good. He looked around at the clean floors, the polished railings, the blooming plants. Everything she touched seemed to carry care. He wondered how someone could give so much without expecting anything in return. Later that morning, he went inside and picked up his phone. His wife and children were still away, but he called to check in. They were surprised to hear from him so early. He asked how they were doing, what they had eaten, and if they were enjoying their time away. His wife laughed softly. You sound different, she said. Calmer, he smiled. Maybe I am, he replied. I think I've been learning a few things while you were gone. After the call, he sat back in his chair and looked around. The maid was dusting the shelves near the living room. He watched how carefully she moved, making sure not to disturb even the smallest picture frame. Can I ask you something? He said suddenly. She looked up. Yes, sir. Why do you always hum when you work? She smiled shyly. It keeps my mind peaceful. I used to hum to my children when they were small. It became a habit. When I'm working, I hum the same songs. It makes me feel close to them. He nodded slowly, taking in her words. That's beautiful, he said. You bring that peace into this house. She lowered her eyes modestly. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. The day passed quietly. He worked a little in his study, but his thoughts kept drifting back to what he had learned from her. Gratitude, simplicity, care. It amazed him that a woman who had faced so many struggles could still find joy in small things. In the evening, he called her into the living room. Please sit, he said kindly. She hesitated for a moment, but then sat down carefully on the edge of the chair. You've worked here for how many years now? He asked. It's been almost 6 years, sir, she said softly. I started just after my husband passed away. His heart sank a little. I didn't know that, he said. She nodded. Yes, it was a hard time. I had no money, no place to stay. I went to many houses looking for work, but no one trusted me. Then I came here. The old caretaker told me to wait because you might need help. That day changed my life. I'll never forget it. He listened quietly. The weight of her story hit him harder now. For her, this job was not just work. It was survival. hope and dignity all at once. "I'm glad you stayed," he said sincerely. "I stayed because this place gave me peace," she said. "Everyone here was kind to me, and I promised myself I would treat this house as if it were my own." He smiled. "You kept that promise," she laughed softly. "Maybe I just have a habit of keeping promises." That night after dinner he couldn't sleep. He walked through the quiet hallways, remembering his life before all of this. The constant rush, the meetings, the long hours spent away from home. He realized how much of life he had missed. His success had given him wealth, but also distance, from his family, his home, and even himself. He stopped by the kitchen, where the faint light was still on. The maid was there, folding a few towels. "You're still awake?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "Oh, I was just finishing this last thing. I'll be done in a moment," he smiled. "You don't have to work this late," she shook her head. "I don't like leaving things half done. I sleep better when I know the day's work is finished." He leaned against the doorway and said softly, "Do you ever take time for yourself? To rest or to do something you enjoy?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes I read," she said. "Old books from the market. I don't have many, but I read them again and again. It reminds me of the stories I used to tell my children when they were small." He nodded. "What kind of stories?" "Simple ones," she said, smiling faintly. "About kindness, about people who help others and find happiness in small things." He chuckled lightly. "You seem to live one of those stories." She looked down, a little shy. "Maybe. But I think everyone can live one if they choose to be kind." The room went quiet again, filled with a sense of gentle understanding. The next day, he decided to do something meaningful. He called his staff and asked them to meet him at the house over the weekend. When they arrived, they were surprised to see the dining table filled with food and gifts. The maid had helped him prepare everything, though she didn't know the full reason for it. Once everyone gathered, he stood at the head of the table. "I asked you all here today," he began, "because I realized something important. I've spent years chasing success, but I forgot to thank the people who make everything possible." The room was quiet. The staff looked at each other, unsure what to say. He continued, "Each one of you plays a part in my life, keeping things running, taking care of what I can't. And I want to say thank you, not as your employer, but as a person who has finally learned how much your efforts matter." He looked toward the maid. "And there's one person here who reminded me of that truth." She looked shocked, not expecting to be mentioned. "She reminded me that kindness doesn't have to be loud. It can be quiet, steady, and still change lives." He handed each person a small wooden box, the ones he had bought earlier. Inside were personal notes for each of them. As they opened their boxes, some smiled, others wiped their eyes quietly. It wasn't about the gifts, it was about being recognized, seen, and appreciated. When it was her turn, he handed her the box he had kept aside. "You started something without even knowing it," he said softly. "You taught me the value of small acts of gratitude. This is for you." She opened the box slowly. Inside was a simple silver pendant shaped like a heart. It wasn't expensive, but it carried deep meaning. She held it carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've done more for this house than anyone else," he said. "You've given it warmth. You've reminded me that home is not built by walls, it's built by hearts like yours." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Just keep being who you are," he said gently. "That's more than enough." Everyone clapped softly, touched by the moment. The dinner that followed was full of laughter and stories. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like a mansion. It felt like a family home. That night, after everyone left, he stood by the window looking out at the stars. The maid came to say goodnight. "Thank you for tonight," she said quietly. "It meant a lot to everyone." "It meant a lot to me too," he said. "I think I finally understand what it means to come home." She smiled, bowed her head slightly, and left. He watched her walk down the hallway, humming softly as always. He turned off the lights and whispered to himself, "Maybe real success is learning how to be grateful." The house was silent again, but in that silence there was peace, a kind of peace that money could never buy. The morning after the dinner was quiet, yet the house felt different. It wasn't just the calm after a busy evening. There was a new kind of warmth in the air, like something unseen had shifted. The man woke up earlier than usual. He stood by his window, watching the sky change colors as dawn slowly broke. The memory of last night's gathering still played in his mind. The laughter, the soft music, the humble tears in people's eyes when they opened their small gift boxes. It had been one of those nights that made people remember what kindness felt like. He dressed simply that morning, leaving his usual formal clothes behind. He walked down to the kitchen where the maid was already at work, her familiar humming drifting softly through the air. She was cutting fresh fruit, the sound of the knife tapping gently against the board. She turned when she saw him and smiled. "Good morning, sir," she said, as she always did. "Good morning," he replied with an easy smile. "You didn't rest enough after last night, did you?" She shook her head. "It's hard to rest when my heart is full," she said with a laugh. "Yesterday was special. Everyone felt appreciated. I can't thank you enough for that." "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "I should have done it long ago." She looked touched but said nothing more. They shared breakfast together, and though the food was simple, it felt rich because of the peace between them. After breakfast, he asked her to join him in the living room. She hesitated, unsure why he wanted to talk again, but followed. He gestured for her to sit down while he remained standing. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began. "About life, about this house, and about people like you who hold everything together quietly." She looked at him. Curious but patient, he continued. "You've been more than just an employee. You've been a part of this home's heart. I've seen how you treat this place as your own, how you care for it when no one's watching. That kind of honesty and love. It's rare." She lowered her eyes, a little shy, unsure how to respond. "I wanted to do something for you," he said. "Something that goes beyond words." Her hands froze. "Sir, you've already done more than enough," she said softly. "That dinner, those gifts, that was too much already." He smiled gently. "What I want to do now isn't about gifts. It's about giving back what you've quietly given for years." He handed her an envelope. She looked at it but didn't open it right away. "What is this?" "Please," he said kindly. "Open it." Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out the papers inside. Her eyes widened when she realized what she was holding. It was a legal document, the title to a small house on the edge of town, fully in her name. She looked up, completely speechless. "Sir." "What is this?" she whispered. "It's yours," he said simply. "A home of your own. You've taken care of this house for years. Now you deserve one that's truly yours." Tears welled in her eyes instantly. She shook her head. "No, sir, I can't accept this. It's too much." "You've already given me more than I could ever repay." He walked closer and said softly, "You don't need to repay me. This isn't charity. This is gratitude. For all the mornings you started before sunrise, for all the times you worked without complaint, for every bit of peace you brought into this home." Her voice trembled. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just promise me you'll accept it and make it a place filled with the same love you've given here." She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I promise," she whispered. He smiled gently. "Good. That's all I wanted." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air in the room felt heavy yet comforting. She finally stood and said quietly, "May I see it?" "Of course," he said. "I'll take you there myself." They got into the car and drove toward the outskirts of town. The road wound through fields and quiet neighborhoods until they reached a small street lined with trees. He stopped the car in front of a modest but beautiful little house with white walls and a small garden out front. She stepped out slowly, staring at it like she couldn't believe it was real. The morning sun glowed over the roof, and a light breeze carried the smell of flowers from a nearby bush. She walked toward the door, touching the wall with her fingertips as if trying to make sure it wasn't just a dream. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's peaceful," he added. "I thought you'd like it here." She turned to him, her eyes full of emotion. "You've changed my life again, sir. I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," he said with a warm smile, "by being who you are." They stood there quietly for a while, and then he handed her the key. She took it gently, holding it close to her chest. "I'll take care of it," she said. "Just like I took care of your house." "I know you will," he said. On the drive back, she sat quietly, still holding the key in her hand. She looked out the window, her mind filled with thoughts of her children. "They'll have a home to come back to," she murmured. "A real home." He glanced at her and said softly, "They'll be proud of you. They already are." When they reached the mansion, she got out of the car and turned to him. "I'll never forget this," she said. "Not in this life," he smiled. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything, sir. Promise me you'll never stop being you, kind, honest, and strong." She smiled through her tears. "I promise." That evening, when she left for the day, he watched her walk out the gate. For the first time in years, he didn't see her as just the maid who kept his home in order. He saw her as a person whose quiet grace had changed his life in ways he could never explain. After she left, he sat on the porch, the soft glow of sunset wrapping everything in gold. He thought about how his life had been before, filled with numbers, deadlines, and endless flights. He had measured success by the size of his house, his cars, his business meetings. But now, sitting there in the quiet, he realized success had a different meaning. It wasn't about what he had built with money. It was about what he had built with heart. The trust, the gratitude, the human connection that money could never buy. A few weeks passed, and one morning she came to him with a wide smile. "Sir," she said excitedly, "my children are coming home this weekend. I want to show them the house you gave me." "That's wonderful," he said, genuinely happy. "They'll love it. I'd like to invite you too," she added shyly. "If you're free, please come." "It would mean a lot," he smiled warmly. "I wouldn't miss it." When the weekend came, he drove out to the little house again. It looked even more alive now. Freshly painted, flowers blooming in the garden, curtains fluttering in the windows. Her children were there, greeting him with respect and gratitude. Inside, the house was small but full of warmth. There were pictures on the walls, a scent of homemade food and laughter filling every corner. The maid looked happier than he had ever seen her. As they sat for dinner, she said quietly, "This home is full of love because of your kindness. I'll never forget what you've done." He smiled and shook his head. It wasn't kindness. It was the right thing to do. After dinner, when he stood up to leave, she walked him to the gate. "Thank you again," she said softly. "Not just for the house, for seeing me." He looked at her with gentle eyes. "Sometimes," he said, "we spend years surrounded by people and still fail to really see them. I'm just glad I finally did." She nodded, smiling through tears. "You've taught me that good hearts still exist." "And you've taught me," he replied, "that they can exist anywhere, even in silence, even in service." He got into his car, and as he drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror one last time. She stood at the gate waving, the house glowing softly behind her. It was a picture he knew he would never forget. When he reached home, the mansion felt different again, not empty, but peaceful. He sat in his study and wrote in his journal, something he hadn't done in years. He wrote, "I came home early thinking I'd find something wrong. Instead, I found what was missing in me: gratitude, kindness, and the reminder that real wealth is measured by the hearts you touch, not the things you own." He closed the journal, turned off the light, and smiled. The night was quiet, and for the first time in a long while he felt truly at peace.